Hello and welcome to Health City Talks. In this installment, we're going to focus on why businesses choose Alberta and what we can do to encourage more businesses to do the same. So my name is Mack. I'm the co-founder of Taproot Publishing, and I'm going to be your moderator today. Taproot Publishing is an independent digital news publication here in Edmonton, Alberta. We publish a number of things, including the Health Innovation Roundup every Wednesday morning, a curated email newsletter that covers all the latest happenings in the sector. My job today is not really to talk about myself. It's instead to keep us on time, make sure we have a really interesting conversation with our expert panelists who are going to help us explore this topic a little bit further. So we have Matt Kesinger, who's the CEO and founder of Forest Devices. Hi, Matt. John Ralston is founder and CEO from Protxx. Hi, John. Nathan Myer is CEO from RRP. Welcome, Nathan. And Christy is CEO of New West Networks. Thanks everybody for joining this conversation today. I'm excited to learn about your businesses, why you chose Alberta, and hopefully we can tease out some lessons for other businesses as a result. So I'd like to start with you, John. Maybe you can tell us a bit about Protxx, what you guys do, and what brought you to Alberta.
Protxx is a company headquartered in Silicon Valley. Although we now have an Alberta corporation as well to support our growing volume of business and development partnerships in Alberta. We're focused on leveraging innovations both in wearable devices and machine learning to tackle one of the biggest challenges that faces patients and their clinical providers who have neurodegenerative medical conditions. Current solutions to help you diagnose all the different physiological impairments that can accompany those, and then track how you respond to treatment and rehab. Those solutions all require scheduling patients for multiple very complex tests carried out by multiple clinical specialists using very expensive equipment. And all of that simply, it limits the patient's ability to get diagnosed promptly, to start treatment, makes it really hard to track how individual patients actually respond to treatment and rehab. And the big kicker for people like Alberta Health Services, this leads to much poorer patient outcomes than are desirable and some really big healthcare inefficiencies. And those are the problems that we address.
And how long have you been in Alberta then? How long has the Alberta office been going?
So we responded, so as a Canadian living in Silicon Valley, of course, I'm on the LinkedIn Canadians in Silicon Valley list. I got pinged on that list just over a year ago by Joanne Fedeko, some of you know, from Connection Silicon Valley, and her partner in crime joining us today. Christy Pierce from New West Networks. We'd actually been looking at setting up shop in Toronto at the Myer Center back then to begin our Canadian outreach. Christy convinced us that we should talk to the innovation team at Alberta Health Services, which we did. That was a few weeks later in August of last year. That led to initial meetings in Calgary in August. We also took the opportunity to visit the Life Sciences Innovation Hub at University of Calgary, some other universities, University of Calgary Human Performance Lab, Mount Royal. That led to follow-on visits in September, October, November, where Alberta Health Services introduced us to 12 of their strategic clinical networks. We secured our initial customers, research partners, 2 Alberta investors, a couple $100,000 in my tax research grants to support some PhD students and some postdoctoral researchers in Calgary and Edmonton, the Glen Rose Rehabilitation Hospital. And we decided, hey, it's time to set up a Calgary corporation, or an Alberta corporation, which did in Calgary. And we've officially been there since January.
Well, congratulations. It sounds like almost the perfect story for a business coming to Alberta and making all of those connections along the way.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're glad to have you.
Yes, he didn't mention all of the endless amount of works and grants and all that kind of stuff that he's done in the meantime.
It's not easy. I don't mean to suggest it's easy, but we're going to come back to a little bit more about the experience. But I want to hear from you, Matt. Tell us about Forest Devices and your experience coming to Alberta.
Sure. So Force Devices is a medical device company focused on pre-hospital stroke detection. So stroke's really expensive and really bad for patients, and it causes permanent disability as opposed to death. And you can imagine that's not just bad for patients, it's also really costly. And in fact, every minute we delay in treatment, this is work that's just recently actually out of the University of Calgary. Every minute of delay is worth about $1,000 to the healthcare services. So Alberta Health Services has been an innovator in stroke for decades, and they've known that pre-hospital diagnosis is so important because you can't get treatment at every hospital. So your EMTs or your paramedics have to be able to direct you to the right hospital. And so last year, AHS actually went out looking for technologies that were trying to solve this problem. I think it was 14 ultimately that they assessed. 4 of our companies came up and did live in-person demonstrations in front of a very large packed audience. And ultimately AHS chose our technology, it's called Alpha Stroke, to test in their ambulances at the end of the year. So we had definitely changed our strategy a lot. To be frank, Canada wasn't necessarily on our 5-year roadmap, but now it is front and center, and everything is going through Alberta. So the plan was to move a good chunk of our operations up to Calgary at the beginning of this year, and then of course COVID hit.
Right.
So we've had to, some of those plans have been stymied, but nonetheless, we've still been able to incorporate the Alberta entity, and really, especially with the help of Christy, build out some Alberta network, even from the distance where we are.
Okay, that's great. So what made you respond to that initial call out from AHS if Canada wasn't really in the roadmap?
Oh, well, because there's no better place to do the study in the world. So there's 2 main factors. One, it's the fantastic geography. You have urban areas, you have rural, you have hyper rural areas. Great, because those are different populations that our technology needs to serve. And then 2, you have, it's a fantastic healthcare system. So over 500 ambulances, all have the same operational structure, and just a phenomenal world-class EMS system. So in my business, I'm always talking to 2 types of doctors. Every time I'm on the other side of the table, there's not one type of doctor, there's always 2 types of doctors: emergency physician and a neurologist or a stroke doctor. And you can imagine that not everywhere do these kind of verticals, integrate or play nicely. But at AHS, it's like, I don't know, 2 gloves or just, 2 hands clasped together. They work so well together. I'm constantly humbled to be working with our partners at AHS.
That's really interesting. We hear a lot in Alberta about the data side of things, so that we have one of the largest single health jurisdictions in the world. And as a result, we have all of this data that is of value to companies. But it's really interesting to hear you mention that same health authority, because it's a big region, can support the work that you're doing with something like ambulances. That's another perspective that we don't hear here too often. Thank you. Nathan, let's hear from you about RRP, and I know you have a little bit of a COVID story to share as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started out of Silicon Valley as a startup from an accelerator called Plug and Play. And we did move to Alberta pretty much straight out of the gate from the initial founding and funding. But we started in shipment of chemicals. So we built a software platform to help move liquid chemicals from origin to destinations for some of the largest companies in the world, like BASF, the largest chemical manufacturer, and Mack, a trucking company based there in Calgary. But that COVID came along, and we seized the opportunity to apply some of our knowledge of building software platforms and matchmaking capability, and really applying it to the need for information about PPE, right? Because there's thousands of companies in Canada that were wanting to send employees back to work safely that had never procured PPE before. And there's just a large asymmetry of information about where industry can procure, or even in, say, BASF's case, they started to manufacture hand sanitizer. They had difficulty figuring out who they're even able to donate hand sanitizer, like who are the most in need organizations to help return safely to work. So in about 6 weeks, we had a minimal viable product. And then over the first month, this PPE marketplace matched about 40,000 different suppliers to buyers. And it's just been, you know, a massive, fun success story since then.
Oh, good for you for seizing the opportunity like that. What was your initial connection to Alberta? How did you first get connected?
Really was through one of our investors. Mack Transportation is based in Calgary, but you know, Calgary for an operating location, or Alberta, wasn't on the top of our mind. But having a few business trips there and then talking to Christy Pierce, you know, the list just became longer and longer and easier for us to pick Alberta as a location, just with the networks and the resources she plugged us into.
Well, on that note, Christy, I guess we have to go to you. It sounds like you've had a role to play in each of these companies, and maybe, you know, I'm sure in many others who have chosen Alberta. So what is your role? How do you factor into a company like Forest Devices or RRP coming and choosing Alberta?
Actually, all three of these companies came to me through different avenues. Like John said, Joanne reached out to my business partner, Joanne Federico, reached out to him cold on LinkedIn, which we do as part of the job.
It works.
Yeah, it works. Nathan came to us through our network in the Valley, and Matt came to me through Alberta Health Services Innovation, Impact, and Evidence team, because we had such a great experience working with Protxx that when Matt came through through their system, they said, you know what, Matt needs to be plugged into the rest of the province and the rest of the opportunities and resources here. So can you work with him? So he came to me that way. But we have a contract. Joanne and I have a contract with the Alberta government for, we're actually in year 2, or we're in year 3. We've done 2 years of our 3-year contract with the Alberta government for investment attraction and trade between Alberta and Silicon Valley. So I work with companies coming up here from the Valley and from around the world, and Joanne works with our companies, our Alberta companies that are looking to access, you know, investors, talent, and resources in the Valley. We just ran a 6-week accelerator program with Protxx Academy for 7 Alberta companies. So, so we kind of work and do both sides of the, you know, the investment attraction and trade system.
And I'm sure lots of places, provinces in Canada, other jurisdictions have similar desire to attract companies, to attract investment. Is there an equivalent to your position, you and Joanne, in other places?
There's lots of economic development organizations, but we're the only ones that the Alberta government took a chance and said, you know what, we really like this whole idea of concierge style investment attraction, that you can really integrate companies into the ecosystem so that they are they have their own networks by the time you're done with them. And John has actually introduced me to a whole bunch of people in Alberta, and so they can stay and they grow, and you know, you don't just bring them in and let them fend for themselves. So we're unique in the country in that we can, we both have really amazing networks. We work with our partners, or we work with health cities. And, you know, when I have a company in life sciences, I'll call up health cities and I'll say, look, I have a company that's doing this. What are the opportunities for them in Edmonton who's doing research in this space? You know, what is the, you know, with Protxx, we said, you know, one of the verticals they're interested in is diabetes. And so they said, well, the Diabetes Institute is here, and these are the people that you need to talk to in this space. And same with the Glen Rose Rehabilitation Facility. So they help connect those dots for me. And yeah, that's how we do it.
Well, John, I'm sure you didn't get a LinkedIn just from Christy and Joanne. I'm sure you were being pursued by other places too. So what was it that made you ultimately choose Alberta, if you could boil it down?
You know, back when so I grew up in Ontario, skiing East Coast moguls, and everything from Mont Blanc to upstate New York to New Hampshire, Vermont. And I did my PhD on the East Coast, but used to fly out every winter to do a Banff ski safari. We do Sunshine and Norquay and Banff and Lake Louise. And and we were literally just about to set up shop in Toronto when I got the outreach, and
Right.
and Christy convinced me to come up and, you know, boots on the ground and visit people and start networking in Calgary. And honestly, it just brought back fond memories of of those ski safaris. And my wife is from Zurich in Switzerland, and she's a big fan of any city where from downtown you can see snow-capped mountains on the horizon, and that added another element to it. So I mean, you know, just the geography and very active outdoor lifestyle played a big role. We're currently looking at opportunities all around the world. We have customers today in the US and Canada and the UK and Japan. We're kicking off collaborations in BC and Ontario and Quebec as we speak. Yeah. But Alberta really is unique in terms of the combination, at least in our business, of expertise, everything from students to commercial partners to big healthcare systems to research organizations, interested in and able to help us move the needle forward on wearable devices and machine learning for a range of neurodegenerative conditions for which there are real markets.
I'm curious to know if you knew of any of the people that you've now started working with before they convinced you to come out and visit Alberta and start that networking. Have you heard of, for example, the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute or any of these organizations, or was that all new?
No, we'd actually heard of a number of them. We have a number of clinical publications. Some of the folks we're working with in Calgary and Edmonton and Lethbridge are active in those fields. So they were people who were on our radar. And this whole process just accelerated it. I mean, we typically go up for 3 days, and in those 3 days, we one day in Calgary, one day in Lethbridge, one day in Edmonton, with some combination of the little Air Canada hopper or a quick drive from Calgary down to Lethbridge through a snowstorm. Yeah, but we covered a lot of ground, and we networked, and our networks helped us network, and our networks grew as did theirs. And I'll say one thing about Alberta: it is really well networked.
I've always found Alberta to be a place where it's easy to go and ask for help. It's easy to go and get a meeting with somebody or get a bit of somebody's time in comparison to other jurisdictions. So it sounds like that's been your experience as well. Matt, you mentioned a couple of things about why you guys chose Alberta. But I mean, what else was there? Was it hockey? Was it our stellar hockey teams that drew you here, or some other factor?
I'm from Pittsburgh, so we have no dearth of stellar hockey right here. No, but I knew of so many of the stroke innovators in Alberta. Seriously, one of the top 2 or 3 places on earth, bar none. So it's the researchers that we interact with, I have known of for many years actually before they came looking for this kind of technology. So.
Good. And Nathan, was there another sort of key factor that made you think Alberta rises above the rest?
Yeah, a lot of the just ingrained industry that already exists there, as it goes for trucking, mining, chemicals. I mean, even at the time, right, BASF was moving their agricultural division there. So it's just like, more meetings in one location because, like business customers, software requirements, right? Like just, yeah. And then as well, like for hiring talent, because at the beginning, we were coming up with a lot of the requirements and we had to have that customer and industry interface. We had to build a team of developers, and we tried the market and we found the right talent, and couldn't be happier with the software development team we run today.
How important are the educational institutions when you're looking at a location, like having universities and the technical schools and things like that? Is that a factor, or is it just nice to have now that you're here and you realize what they're able to produce?
Wow, I guess we're just benefiting from their results today. Yeah. I actually looked at the universities, but then again, it's nice having them there. Like I called Christy Pierce, 2 weeks ago, and within a week, you had me at the University of Calgary with a manager running like a biosafety level 2 lab. And now we're, hiring and consulting with one of his lab managers. So, I mean, we're feeling the benefits in multiple ways from getting in the right universities.
That's great. Well, I imagine none of you would be on this call if you hadn't had a bad experience coming to Alberta. But I want to know a little bit more about what it was like once you got the introduction and made those connections and actually started to put things in motion. So maybe Matt, we can start with you on that one.
Yeah, so once things are started being put in motion, there's just more motion. Like the momentum gains and gains and gains, and there's just more balls to keep in the air, bigger networks to manage. So what I've found is almost to a one. Every time we thought we needed something, like it was just one or two steps away from the connection.
That's helpful for time, for sure, right? Things don't take as long as they might otherwise.
That's true. Everything takes longer than you want it to, but yeah, it takes a lot less time than you may fear.
Yeah. What about for you, John? What's the experience been like? It sounds like you've also just been moving from one thing to the next, keeping it going, but what stands out for you?
The biggest challenge in a geography that has that much opportunity is that once your contacts and exploratory discussions start snowballing, it takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of information to share, a lot of meetings to follow up on. Next round, I mean, we were on a monthly schedule, flying up to Alberta. And a lot of things start very, very aggressively, but then you encounter the fact, that healthcare organizations actually move at a glacial pace compared to startups. And, you go through that wild elation in the beginning to the trough of desolation. We'll never get this done. But eventually, patience bears out. And then COVID hits and everything has to go the remote. But we were luckily far enough along with all of our current engagements that we just keep on shipping product up there, and we can do all our training remotely. So if anything, COVID has been wind in our sails as opposed to an impediment, because the whole world now wants remote monitoring and continuous monitoring.
Right.
But the big challenge is that success breeds success, and you suddenly realize that you only have half the number of people on your team you really need, but those are good problems to have, right?
Those are the problems you want to spend time solving, right? How do I get good people onto this team? Christy, we're in the middle of the pandemic still, so we don't know what it's going to look like yet, but it does seem at the moment that people are trending, as John says, more toward remote work. It's certainly been a challenge. It seems, as a sort of outsider to the world of hockey, that it's a challenge to get hockey players to come to Edmonton and Calgary. I imagine we sometimes run into that problem with startups. So what has your experience been like? Do businesses balk at how far away we are really from everything else, or is that not really a factor? And then is COVID, do you think, going to really finally destroy that final barrier that we always hear about?
You know what? Actually, one of our biggest selling features is we're so close to the valley. So Calgary's only a 2-hour and I think 8-minute flight, and Edmonton's only 2.5 hours or 2 hours and 35 minutes. So the fact that we're only one time zone over, and we are so close, and we also, our companies are working on in Canadian dollars as soon as they start coming they start exploring Canada. It's a big selling feature for us, actually, as opposed to being a deterrent. So it's been good. And with the remote opportunities, companies are, we've been busier than we've ever been. Companies are open to the conversation. They are realizing, Silicon Valley is not going back to the office until next summer. So they are very open to the conversation of remote teams and whatnot, and it's something that we're working on aggressively.
Do you think that opens new opportunities for Alberta that wouldn't have been there in the past, or would have been more difficult to unlock?
Definitely, because we have the talent here.
Right.
So we have everything, and we have, obviously, again, give you the government pitch. We have young, highly skilled workforce, or we have a competitive business environment. The government just reduced the corporate tax rate to 8%, so we're actually one of the most competitive in North America. But coupling that with the fact that everybody just realized that it's okay to have teams working remote. We're working with a cybersecurity company right now that's just incorporated in Alberta and are building their team out here and whatnot because they can, and they realize that it's okay now. So it's actually an advantage for us.
Nathan, have you run into any barriers in your experience so far in setting up shop in Alberta? Is there anything that was more challenging than you thought it might be?
No, I mean, well, I just wanted to piggyback on the whole, so we were just hiring more developers, and I did go online and check, wonder where the lowest cost tax area is in Canada. And then Alberta came up and I'm like, oh, yep, it's always Alberta. Like, it's always the right answer. But so like, that's not a barrier. And I didn't know, Christy, that they just lowered it. But yeah, that's great. For barriers, so we were always we can work from anywhere. Like, we don't have to be we are 100% remote. Like, we don't have to be Albertan. So yeah, we're just now normal. And we just happen to choose Alberta. So like, what are the barriers? Like, yeah, I mean, we're fully virtual. I just don't see any barriers really. Or like, if I see a barrier, I call Christy, tell her the situation, and then it's resolved.
Right. So I guess, yeah, it's a better question. Are there any insurmountable barriers? It sounds like you've had touch points and connections along the way to deal with any of the, obviously challenges come up whenever you're doing something new, but to overcome them, it's been a fairly straightforward process, sounds like.
Yep. Yeah, I honestly can't think of any.
Matt, how about you? Anything constructive from your guys' experience that we might be able to help another company learn from?
I might have some suggestions in the coming weeks about the travel policy. I've been connected with a really great immigration lawyer, and so hopefully I'm going to overcome those challenges here shortly. But if not, I might have something to add that. So far, all has been well.
What kinds of companies or organizations have you gotten connected with, Matt, here in Alberta? Like, who's the types of organizations you've ended up spending the most time with, would you say?
The most time with, I'm not sure, but some of the types, contract manufacturing, third-party logistics, granting agencies, grant writers, other organizations, other companies that are providing medical devices that are selling to AHS and other Canadian healthcare systems. Yeah, I don't think there's one like grouping or set that we could say that we've spent the most time with, because we've spent the time with just such a broad selection.
Right, and it doesn't feel like there's any missing group that you haven't yet been able to connect with.
Oh, there's always missing money. So I'm always looking for Canadian investors now. So, but that's going to be a universal problem for everybody.
John, is there anything you wish had happened differently about coming to Alberta, setting up shop? Anything from your experience that you think could be improved or iterated on, I guess, as a startup?
Well, in hindsight, had we known then what we know now, I think we would have started this process a year earlier. There was an opportunity, again, as Christy pointed out, a short 2-hour flight away that we could have capitalized on sooner.
So that's you kind of starting sooner. I guess the lesson for us is Christy should have sent you a LinkedIn a little bit sooner, perhaps. Similar question for you as I asked Matt. Are there any groups in Alberta that you haven't found? Any type of organization or individuals you wanted to connect with that you've struggled to?
Not so far.
Oh, sorry, for John. I meant same question for you, John, as I asked Matt.
Well, I mean, critical for companies in our stage as we reach out into new geographies is securing, in additional to a local R&D base or customer base, is securing a local investor base. And I will say this about Alberta investors: they know a lot about the energy sector, but they're very shy about everything else. And I think we would have spent more time sort of marshaling the resources to educate Alberta investors about why this is so exciting for everyone else and should be exciting for them. And we have our first 2 Alberta investors on board, but we would have put a lot more effort into that sooner, realizing that there's a little bit of education to be done. when it doesn't involve drilling a hole in the ground.
Right. Okay. So we've hit on something that is possibly true then that we often hear in Alberta, that the investors are a little gun shy when it comes to tech. Glad that you have your first couple of investors already, though. What about you, Nathan? I know you said customers are here, and that's been an important thing for you guys. What's been a missing ingredient, do you think? Is it investors as well? Is there something different that stands out?
So yeah, on the investor side, we're good. So we got some pretty great contracts recently that's going to take us rather far. Some of our initial investors were based out of Alberta, although to make those investments, it took them going to Silicon Valley and kind of, germinating the idea and going through that, seeing what it's like in the Valley, and then boom, they invest. But then, right, with meetings now, it'd be interesting to hear the pitch of why I should take Albertans' money versus some contacts I have in Silicon Valley's money, the other way around, So, Christy, I'll call you about that later.
Kirsty, anything you want to add on that, given you're on the call?
No, you know what? One of the things that I try and help companies with is government programs, but when it comes to investors and whatnot, there's always a bit of a challenge in Alberta. So we're as well connected as we can be in the ecosystem, and we do, put the opportunities out to our network that we can. But Joanne still works with my companies that are coming up to Alberta to help them with access to capital in the Valley. So we do what we can where we can. Yeah. And if we can find companies, I think all three of our companies here have had some success with government programs, so grants and whatnot. So we do what we can on that front and get companies as connected in as possible.
Right. We're coming to the end of our time, but a couple more things I'd like to ask you guys. John, is there anything in particular about what we've talked about or about your experience that is special for health in particular as a sector, health innovation companies versus, just tech companies more broadly? Obviously we've touched on, AHS and the big health jurisdiction. You guys have mentioned some of the centers of excellence that exist here. Is there anything else in particular that makes Alberta a really good place for health?
There is. So I think it starts, or an important piece of it is this Alberta Health Service structure that makes it probably one of the largest healthcare providers and payers, so integrated system, that also has a strong focus on innovation and evidence, so go shopping for technologies that can improve the economics. But that is also, I don't know if it's triggered or if it's maybe even leveraged, the fact that if you now look within the major educational institutions, so University of Calgary, the University of Alberta, Mount Royal, Lethbridge, there are very, very strong research centers there that bridge the gap that's really important to us between really smart scientists and engineers and people interested in medical applications. And again, specific for us, we're all about innovating in wearable devices to give really unique data, and machine learning to give really unique interpretations of that data. And there is still no place else on the planet where we can find the expertise in both of those piles that already collaborate and work together. So bridges have already been built.
Right, and now all you have to do is cross them. That's great. Matt or Nathan, anything you want to add on that? Anything else that we haven't covered already that makes Alberta a particularly attractive destination for companies in the health space?
I couldn't have said anything better. Bridges across verticals. In Pittsburgh, actually where I'm from, we say that we have the most bridges in North America, that Venice is the only place that has more bridges than we do. But I got to say, Calgary and Alberta sure have a lot more, at least metaphorical, bridges.
Right.
And to pile on top of that, John, I agree. Like in Alberta Health Services being innovative, whenever we launched RRP, they were literally one of the first users before, we're thinking like, who should we reach out to? They actually were on our site before we reached out to them as one of the very first users. So it's just like, thank you so much for being there and kind of having that culture, because I think the early adopter culture is super important for a company or like a technology startup like ours.
I mean, one of the most valuable things a government or quasi-government organization can do for a startup is be the first customer. So that's fantastic to hear. Okay, let's close on a more positive note here then on looking ahead to the future, not thinking about COVID, but just in general. What's on the radar for you in terms of Alberta and for your company? So I'd like to ask each of you if you can share a little bit about what your plans are and what sort of opportunities you see for your company in Alberta. And maybe Nathan, we can start with you.
So we are on the cusp of delivering a couple significant contracts that will have follow-on contracts to drive a lot of revenue we're excited about, and with that comes a lot of work. So for us, it's going to be the rigor of hiring and highly skilled teams that work well together and kind of continue scaling up with talent. And as well, like that would be we're launching a Canadian medical marketplace that will be vetted through Health Canada, medical devices, directorate with the processes, and then to also protect the critical Canadian supply chain, where you have NGen supercluster investing in a lot of supply chains to stand up and protect them, keep them in Canada. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure they're getting all the business as possible in Canada. Great, thank you. Matt.
Hopefully seeing BAMP sometime in the next few months. We'll be moving a good deal of operations up there once we get the world under control a little bit more, and hopefully we'll see the completion of a study and a transfer and a couple new hires there in the next 12 months.
Very exciting. I wish you great skiing when you're here. John, what's coming up for Protxx here in Alberta?
So our next major peer-reviewed clinical validation study is with a very important Canadian partner that is currently in the publication process. And these things, when they come out, they tend to bring a flood of new customers. So that's real exciting. And then two of our highest profile new product development initiatives. One of them we've actually just wrapped up with Alta ML, a pretty significant machine learning development. We're writing a patent, we're writing the publication, we're in some very interesting follow-on customer discussions. And then our next generation sensor is currently being prototyped in the clinic in Calgary in the Human Performance Lab, and that has attracted a lot of investor interest. So on all fronts, as these things come out and we start hoisting them up the sales flagpole, we're bullish on the opportunities coming at us through Alberta.
That sounds like very exciting, and also a lot of work that you have coming up here, or are in the middle of, I guess I should say.
Yeah, just done. I mean, I have to start reaching out to Christy more to get some to get some help.
Christy, what's up next for you and Joanne, and how do you see things playing out here in Alberta in the next little while and attracting companies?
Actually, we just finished off a 6-week virtual customer and market acceleration program for our companies. So we're working on that. We're actually launching a grassroots marketing campaign. We just brought on our first sponsor, Aspen Properties, and a Why Alberta marketing campaign, because one of the things that we really we're really working on is Alberta's profile in the Valley. The other provinces are really aggressively courting talent and companies and whatnot right now, and so we're just making sure that we do the same. We've built really strong relationships with consulate there, trade commissioners there, and our network. So we're working on that, but obviously working on more companies. Tomorrow we have a press conference with one of the, actually the top ag and food accelerator in the world, and fund that just is announcing some stuff with Alberta tomorrow. So that's very exciting. And yeah, just working on bringing more startups, more, yeah, just working on that pipeline between Alberta and the Valley.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for sharing a bit about your experience and what it's been like coming to Alberta, why you chose Alberta. I've heard lots about bridges and connections and networks and how important those are and how much of a difference they've made in your success. I know the mountains are appealing and the hockey team's a little less so. And obviously Alberta has some really key benefits for companies in the health innovation space that all of you have been able to capitalize and make the most of in terms of those opportunities. So thank you all for sharing. We have Matt Kesinger, CEO and founder of Forest Devices, Nathan Myer, CEO of RRP, John Ralston, founder and CEO of Protxx, and Christy Pierce, CEO of New West Networks. This has been Health City Talks. You can find more sessions like this on a variety of different topics at edmontonhealthcity.ca. And if you are coming to Alberta and you want to know a little bit about what's happening in the space, be sure to check out my publication. It's at taprootedmonton.ca, and you can find all the latest on health and tech and innovation. Stay safe, everyone, and thank you for your time.